Okay, so today we're talking with Ken Rubin, and he will be telling us a little bit about his role in ISSBD over the years and some of his ideas about membership and also his favorite biennial meeting memories. So Ken, I know many of us know you, but certainly there are some newer members. And so why don't you just introduce yourself to everybody and then describe some of your different roles that you've played in ISSBD over the years.
Hi, I'm Ken Rubin, and I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say about myself, other than the fact that I've been a member of ISSBD since sometime in the early 1980s. The first meeting that I went to was in Toronto, so I don't know exactly when that was, but it was a very long time ago. Is there anything else you want me to say?
So it looks like I just looked it up. Toronto was in 1981. Yep. And what are some of the different roles that you've played in besides being a member?
Besides just being a member, let's see. I'm going to tell you a story. I was elected somehow to the executive committee in 1987. And that was my first, I guess, official role, other than being an ordinary member in the organization. It was a pretty exciting meeting. It was in Tokyo. And at that meeting, the president of the society, outgoing, was Paul Baltus. The incoming president was Harold Stevenson. And I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway, because that's who I am. I was a kid in 1987 and wasn't quite sure how I fit with this great group of people who had just been elected as members of the executive committee. And I remember Baltus making a grand announcement, congratulating all the new members for being elected to the executive committee. And he actually went so far, see, I'm wearing my Canadian hat here. He went so far as to say that his one disappointment about the election was that there wasn't a member elected from French Canada. And of course, what I should have said at the very beginning is that I'm from Montreal originally, which I think is as French Canada as you can get. And I don't think he expected some little kid to respond to his remark, because there actually was a French Canadian who ran in that election, who no one's ever heard of. But at any rate, I got up and I said in as best Quebecois as possible that the society is not a political one. It's a society for the study of behavioral development, and there's no need to bring politics into this society for any reason whatsoever. And I said that in French. And I think because of that statement, the incoming president, Harold Stevenson, became sort of like a mentor to me. And one of the things that he wanted to make sure that I do is not commit suicide and say such things to my elders. But the other is that I think he was so pleased that I did so, because one of the things that Harold studied and was most famous for was his work on culture. And he didn't really want to bring politics into the society. So that was my first position that I held. And then I believe this is going to take a while, so you might have a little time here. I believe I was suggested by two members of the publications committee to be within a 2-year period. So can we stop this or no? Because I want you to look up when the conference was in Jyväskylä.
Yep, just a minute. Let me. Oh, actually, I have it. I have it right here. So that's 1989.
Great. Okay, so between 1987 and 1989, the folks on the publications committee made the decision to suggest that I become the next editor of the International Journal of Behavioral Development. And it was a wonderful invitation. I was just coming off being an associate editor at Child Development. And Harold Stevenson at the meeting in Jyväskylä told me during just about when the executive committee was about to start that I ought to wait and sit outside the meeting room and he'll come get me in a couple of minutes. And I don't know how many members of ISSBD, old or young, will have ever heard this story, so it's worth telling. So I was really excited because I had heard from the publications committee chairpersons that I was going to be suggested as the incoming editor, and was fabulously excited about it. And there I was sitting on a chair for about a half an hour, and apparently I knew something must be up, and maybe Harold didn't like me as much as I thought he did. So he next comes out of the meeting. He says, "Come on in," and then he asked me to sit down, and he said, "Well, it appears as if you're not going to be the editor of IJBD." And I didn't know whether to weep or I didn't know what to do. I couldn't figure out why nobody loved me anymore. And he said, "Instead, you're going to be the membership secretary and of the organization and secretary." And I, that's sort of out of the blue. In those days, those positions were not elected. They were chosen by the executive committee. So what was I supposed to say? Anyway, I think that's a pretty funny story. So my next role in the society came about between 89 and I believe the next meeting in 91. I have no idea where that was. But
91 was Minneapolis.
Was Minneano place. And and during that period of time, it seemed as if the society's funding was not great. And it came about because the person who was responsible for getting dues, so that I can't remember, I'm not going to mention names here. We had multi-levels of due structure at that time. And so it was kind of different than it is now. And so if one was in China, for example, or if one was in Korea, or if one was in India, then we had these local representatives who would be collecting funds in local currency. Same was true in Brazil, in South America. And so that money stayed within the community within which the representative was. Oh, we had many members from Russia as well in those days. I don't think we have members in Russia anymore. So at any rate, yeah. The person who was collecting the dues did not take it upon himself to instruct his helpers to understand the due structure. So what he said was, for all Americans and people from Europe, and he, I guess, mentioned which countries he meant by in Europe, we ask people to pay X amount. But for everybody else, they pay, you send out a different letter asking people to pay in their local currency to their regional representative. It turns out that his helpers were his kids. and I guess he didn't really explain exactly what he meant by non-American, because I'm wearing my Canadian hat again. Canadians, and there were a great many of us who were members of the society, received pay your funds to a regional representative. And the same was true to people who were in Germany and to people who were in Finland and so forth and so on. So it made a mess of our budget and of our financial holdings. So suddenly I became the treasurer as well. So from becoming elected to the executive committee to within 2 years becoming something to do with membership and secretary, I also became treasurer of the organization. It was a pretty busy time. And eventually, after I survived all of that, I was elected president of the society. So those are the roles that I play. I'm sorry it took so long, and you're going to have to cut it all out. But it's pretty funny from my perspective.
Yep. No,
so
I hope
these are the rich bits of the history of the society that should be on tape.
Yeah, and I hope that we can keep most of it. Maybe we'll have like a longer version, and then we sort of send out a shorter version. So why don't you speak a little bit about what you perceive as some of the unique benefits of being an ISSBD member?
Well, I'm wearing it on my head. So when I was in Canada, so that would have been from 71 to 95, I was a member of SRCD, and one of the things I really felt as an outsider in a way to the Society for Research and Child Development, despite having been an associate editor of the journal in the early 80s. And at that time, the associate editors were very much like editors. We each received 150 manuscripts a year, and we each had our own editorial boards. But I still felt as an outsider, and was looking for something that would be much more international. And my lab at Waterloo was fairly international. I had scholars, mostly students who would be coming in from Europe, who would be doing a semester with me or up to a year. And they would spend time in my lab, and it was really appealing to me. It was my lab became more international. And so when ISSBD was in Toronto, I attended the conference. And again, can't remember exactly when that was, but it was so exciting for me to meet all these people from other countries and discovered that they had very similar interests to what I had. And so there began to be some collaborations and communications. And of course, then in those days, the communication was in writing. I'm about to retire, and I have all those letters. Someone's going to have to get them one of these days. They're sitting in multiple filing cabinets in my office at the University of Maryland, but I've kept them all. And it's really beautiful that we can get to meet folks in distant countries and eventually get not only to speak to them, to go to dinner with them, but also actually to collect data with them. And I've been doing that now for a very long period of time. And that was what was most appealing about ISSBD to me, being among an international group and coming back to SRCD and saying, by the way, that's what you're missing. So I was one of the original members of the international committee of SRCD, and they were looking to our society, ISSBD, as the model for internationalization. And I don't think we take great enough pride in that in our everyday business. It's something we shouldn't lose.
Great, thank you. And then sort of on like just for kind of fun, I think, we all would like to hear about some of your favorite biennial meeting memories. And I know that you probably have a lot of them, but maybe top 3 memories.
I'm going to give you 5. Okay. So the very first one was the year that I was elected to the executive committee. Harold Stevenson organized a group of, I want to say 15 to 20 Westerners to go to Beijing to meet with a group of scholars in China to help organize graduate studies, particularly at the doctoral level, in the country, in the PRC, in the People's Republic of China. And I think I was probably easily the youngest one. I was certainly the only one that was wearing a t-shirt and Sperry topsiders when everybody else was wearing a jacket and a tie. But at any rate, it was there that I think all of our contemporary studies that are ongoing in China derive from. I don't think there would have been the development in such a strong regard in the People's Republic today if it wasn't for that meeting that Harold Stevenson organized. Yeah. And one of the fun things that happened was we all gave a little description about our work to each other. We all had to stand up and give a 3-minute spiel about our work. And there were 2 young Chinese bilingual scholars who both had their master's degrees, I believe both from Shanghai. And I may be wrong on that. One was Kang Li, and the other one I'll tell you about in a second. So each of them would translate what these wonderful scholars were working on at the time. And every one of their projects had to do with the one child in the family policy. And Kang Li was at the University of Toronto. He was very serious about, his translation. And so was the other young man who, in addition to doing his translation, he offered an opinion, which I thought was just wonderful because there was usually some critical aspect. He provided some critique as well, which to me, I felt sitting back that he might never get back to Shanghai, that he'd end up, in some jail and, tortured. But that's the sort of person I'm attracted to, someone who's going to be jailed and get tortured. So when we all visited the Great Wall, all of us Westerners, and it was really a who's who of Westerners. I don't think I have the time to say who they all were, but anyway, you can look them up, all of you people watching this. But I went and chased down this young guy and wanted to make sure that he was okay. And then I said, if you ever want to visit me in Canada, I'll bring you over. You can visit for a year. You can visit, for 6 months, 3 months, or a day. Doesn't make a difference. And he expressed some interest. And then I said, or the other thing you can do is you can come and get your PhD with me. And I'll get you the funding and bring you in. And I promise you I'll get you the funding. All you have to do is in those years, he wrote letters. So again, write me a letter and I'll respond right away. And that person was Xinyan Chen, who I think will appear on one of these interviews. And he eventually became president of the society. So that was one of my favorite moments. China, the conference in Tokyo that led to the workshop in China. The next one was tour, and I'll only take a second about tour. So I was living with my family in Germany. I was visiting the Max Planck Institute for the study of psychology. And at the end of my visit in Munich, we drove across France and ended up in Tours. And one of my friends, who is a traveler, actually I can mention him, his name is Barry Schneider, and he booked all his buddies into a chateau in the Loire Valley. So there we were, my two kids, and Margot, my wife, and myself, living in the turret in the while everybody else was in tour at some hotel, Motel 6 or something like that. Anyway, before the end of that conference, the entire executive committee had been spending time at the pool in the chateau. And I thought, this is the coolest thing ever, because why aren't they at the meeting? They're all sitting around this pool. They're not staying at the chateau. Eventually, we ended up having dinner at a Michelin restaurant that was associated with this chateau. It was lovely. It's one of my favorite memories of all these folks. I'm going to call out the president at the time. He deserves mention. It was Bill Hardup, who was the president of ISSBD at the time. He spent a full day at our pool having lunch and dinner with us. My next favorite memory was when I had been elected president, and I was invited to give an address in, of all places, Beijing. So there I was, returning to where, in a way, I started, being on the executive committee. I was now president, and I really took this business seriously. There were two memorable things. One was just being up there on the stage with the entire membership in front of me, giving a welcoming talk and feeling so warm and fuzzy that all these people from all over the world internationally had come to China. And it really was because of Harold Stevenson's original meeting there in 1987, and how far the society had come, because we were now on pretty much every continent, and pretty much every continent was represented in that audience at the time. And I believe, Julie, you were at that meeting.
It was my first conference ever.
Yeah, so there you go. I think I dragged a whole bunch of people.
You did. It was worth it.
And we celebrated the lab that I was working with at Maryland, celebrated by going to, of all places in China, the Hard Rock Cafe. Yeah. So that's my next favorite. Then the last one that was a favorite of mine was, and I'm going to really botch this name because I don't know if it's Ghent or if it's Ghent, but it was in Ghent, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And there were two memorable events about that conference. First of all, nobody knew where Ghent was, and some people were disappointed that we were going to a place, that nobody knew about, and were worried about the numbers of people who would be attending the conference. It was spectacularly organized. It really was beautifully organized, and it really is all about ISSBD. You could put the conference in any little town, and people are going to come because it's about the people. It's not necessarily about the place. And besides, the place was absolutely charming. So at that meeting, one of the keynotes was by my mentor, Robert Hind. And I remember sitting pretty much right in front of him as he was giving his talk. And he spent at least a paragraph criticizing the work that I was doing and thinking that it was a big joke. And it was meant in a very fatherly way to be funny, but nobody else probably understood that. And we had a back and forth where I would make hilarious fun of him publicly as well. But anyway, then there was the dinner, the farewell dinner at Ghent. And it was in an old castle. And there were no seats, tables. So we all had to find, like a bar table or something like that to sit beside. And out of the, I had to find some chairs for the elder statesman in the group that I was with. So I had to find a chair for Robert Hind, and one for Bill Hardup. And I can't remember who the other ones were, but they were all, a generation up from me. And Robert then immediately grabbed from a waiter an entire tray of wine, and he brought it over to where we were sitting. And he got up, stood up, while people were going out getting their meals in some other room. And he went tink, tink, tink on his glass. He said, "I have an announcement to make." And I thought, uh-oh. He got up and people were listening to him because he was one of the keynotes, and they thought he was going to say something, hindish about relationships or culture. But he didn't. He announced that this young guy who was beside him was going to retire. He's going to quit his job and work full-time on the peace movement, which of course is how Robert ended his career, being very active in peace, love, and understanding.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite moments ever because people took him seriously, as people were wont to do. They all came over to me and said, "Really? You're retiring?" So, at any rate, that was one of my absolute favorite moments.
I can see why. Yep. Well, Ken, this has been terrific. I think that this will be so nice for ISSBD members who know you, but also those who haven't had a chance to meet you yet, to learn about your history with ISSBD, which has been rich and so fantastic. And I think society has really benefited. That's my reminder not to make this go for too long. Has really benefited over the years from your involvement. And so we hope that you'll continue to be a member. I'm going to end there. Thanks again, Ken, and I will definitely talk to you soon.